hits your eye like a big pizza pie. That's amore.
Buonasera. Chiedo scusa dietro. Would you please? We are starting here. Thanks. Either come in or just a couple of steps out. Questa sessione sarà prevalentemente in lingua inglese. It will be mostly in English. And chi ha bisogno della traduzione può prendere le cuffie fuori dalla porta e poi si possono fare normalmente interventi in italiano e per le domande, eccetera, eccetera. So if you need translation, you get your earphones outside of the door.
Mostly Italian, mostly English. Italian? Okay.
Va bene, fai. E aspettiamo un attimo, let's wait just a second for the people who got outside to get their earphones. Aspettiamo un secondo per le persone che sono andate a prendere le cuffie. Prego, accomodatevi. Se vi servono le cuffie stanno lì fuori. Cuffie per la traduzione simultanea sono fuori. Molto bene, benvenuti. Io vi rubo solo 30 secondi. Vi do il benvenuto da parte della Online News Association, che è la più grande organizzazione di giornalismo digitale, di giornalisti digitali del mondo, che ha per il 4º anno organizzato alcuni eventi qui al Festival di Perugia. E gli altri eventi li trovate sul programma, ma io sono qui poi a vostra disposizione dopo l'evento per parlare se avete desiderio di conoscere qualche cosa di più. Do la parola a Marina Petrillo, che è direttore di Radio Popolare, oltre che, non saprei come dire meglio, Twips, della twittosfera italiana, per introdurre il nostro ospite e per gestire l'incontro. Grazie.
Grazie a Mario Tedeschini e benvenuti. E già che ci sono, siccome è la prima volta che in teoria di lavoro io uso il microfono, eppure non riesco a rimetterlo. Mi dicevate, così va bene, ok. Volevo salutare le traduttrici, perché non le saluta mai nessuno, fanno un lavoro fantastico e quindi volevo salutarle. Fanno un lavoro bellissimo anche in altre conferenze del festival, ed è una delle cose più interessanti è questa frontiera anche linguistica che si scioglie nel nostro incontro con le persone che rappresentano quella frontiera. E Steve Buttry è una di queste persone. Quando ho un dubbio vado a leggere Steve Buttry. Quando ho un timore o una timidezza su come procedere nel nuovo lavoro digitale che si è posto a chi faceva giornalismo tradizionale, negli ultimi anni. Vado a leggere Steve Buttry e vi spiego rapidamente perché, prima di lasciargli la parola, ricordandovi che quando lui avrà finito di raccontarci un nucleo di concetti del suo lavoro sulla aggregazione etica, sul modo etico di aggregare notizie e produrre giornalismo che aggrega quindi diverse fonti, ci sarà spazio sicuramente per le domande e il mio compito sarà solo di facilitare questo vostro dialogo con lui se necessario. Steve Buttry è Digital Transformation Editor per Digital First Media, è uno dei pionieri del Digital First e del Mobile First. È stato direttore e coordinatore di tante operazioni che hanno insegnato a giovani giornalisti e giornalisti tradizionali già esperti come lavorare con la propria comunità di riferimento, integrando il concetto stesso di comunità all'interno del lavoro giornalistico attraverso i social media, ma mi sembra anche con una forte esperienza legata al territorio. Steve Buttry sembra virtuale, ma in realtà è molto concreto. Editor and Publisher lo ha nominato Editor dell'anno nel 2010, ha cominciato a lavorare quando ancora il giornalismo era davvero il forte giornalismo degli anni 60, 70, 80 che aveva una propria tradizione, molto sfidata da quella. No, era molto giovane, credo che abbia cominciato prima di finire l'università. Is that right?
Very young.
Yeah. Soprattutto
I was still in high school.
andava al liceo. Soprattutto fa coaching e training per le testate che vogliono e devono in qualche modo accogliere le sfide del nuovo giornalismo e dei nuovi strumenti. Ci dice Steve Buttry che dobbiamo cambiare il modo in cui le redazioni e i giornalisti pensano e lavorano. Ha fatto tanti tipi di operazioni per unire fra di loro fonti diverse, per esempio creando interi gruppi di centinaia di blog che diventano fonte tutti insieme contemporaneamente. Ha condotto molti seminari sull'etica. Vi ricordo soltanto un titolo che a me aveva colpito molto di uno dei documenti che Steve ha scritto, che tra l'altro trovate tutti, questa è una delle caratteristiche di Steve Buttry, la grande generosità, quasi tutti i suoi le formulazioni del suo pensiero, della sua esperienza, li trovate sotto forma anche divisi per argomenti sul suo blog, che è stevebutry.wordpress.com. Una delle cose che ricordo più emblematiche è il suo titolo "I nostri lettori ci guardano". Steve Buttry ha in qualche modo messo subito al centro della discussione sui nuovi media e sul nuovo giornalismo la questione dell'etica e della qualità del contenuto. Una delle cose più importanti nell'ambito di quella discussione collettiva che tutti stiamo facendo qui, che facciamo anche al festival, è quella, per esempio, le sue osservazioni su ciò che accade a quelle testate che scelgono il paywall, che cosa succede dietro al paywall, come ci riporta sempre alla questione della qualità del contenuto quando si chiede a un lettore di oltrepassare una barriera che offusca per accedere a un contenuto in cambio di un ricavo. Si è occupato molto quindi anche di come si producono ricavi dal nuovo giornalismo, non è estraneo quindi a quello che Arianna Ciccone, che organizza il festival, chiama il santo graal, cioè come faremo a mantenere il giornalismo in generale e questo nuovo tipo di giornalismo. Ha scritto molto anche contro il plagio, contro la copia, per il riconoscimento etico delle fonti, per il chiarimento e anche la ricchezza con cui Internet ci dà la possibilità di riconoscere le fonti a cui attingiamo quando parliamo di aggregazione. Generosità dunque, etica, qualità del contenuto. Credo che dobbiamo a forse un pugno, una decina di nuclei di persone che spesso incontriamo qui al Festival di Perugia una volta l'anno, quell'aver riaperto la nostra curiosità sul ripensare il nostro lavoro, ripensare il rapporto con la comunità e con i lettori, imparare ad utilizzare i social media con le loro caratteristiche più preziose, riportando la questione dell'etica giornalistica e della qualità, approfittando di questa rivoluzione. Steve Buttry è una di queste persone che continua a fare questo per noi ogni giorno. Quindi è un punto di riferimento, gli lascio la parola per raccontarci di che cosa vuol dire ethical aggregation. Steve Buttry.
Thank you very much. I'm honored and humbled by that introduction. Let's put the slides up here. I'm gonna run through some slides here, and I will confess that I didn't translate any of these myself. The translations are all Google, so if they're excellent, then Google did an excellent job. If there's something funny, it's probably not my sense of humor. It's probably Google's translation. I do want to let you know that these slides, including the translations and links to blog posts that I've done on aggregation and curation, that will cover many of the points that we've done, are available on my blog. I did a blog post today with links to those earlier posts as well as to these slides. They're also on SlideShare. Some of you are already following me, and I appreciate that, on Twitter at Steve Buttry. And I welcome any follow-up by email after we're done here, but certainly during the conversation, you don't have to wait till the end to ask a question. If somebody has a question now, wave your hands and we'll get a microphone to you, and we'll address that right away. But I do welcome continuing the discussion. Aggregation has gotten a bad rap in journalism. It's like a bad, like a foul word or something. Bill Keller last year in the New York Times did I was going to say a blog post, but it was a column that I read online. He was referring to something that Arianna Huffington had done or something. He said, I felt so aggregated, like he had been violated somehow. That's an example of the esteem in which aggregation is held. But he went further. He said there's often a thin line between aggregation and theft. And that line is attribution and linking. And it's not a thin line. If you attribute and you link, you're doing ethical journalism. If you rip off, you're stealing things. And what was interesting to me was that as a journalist who spent most of my career working in the American Midwest, I was very used to the experience of us at the Des Moines Register or the Omaha World Herald or the Kansas City Star and Times, other newspapers where I worked. We would do a story, we would break a story, and it would become big national news. And the New York Times would send somebody out to do a story. And they aggregated what we did with no credit. Now, sometimes they were re-reporting. I think they asked somebody, hey, is the story in the Kansas City Times right? And, that constituted re-reporting. But aggregation is what most journalism builds on something that came before. And aggregation is building on what came before. And so I found it a little disingenuous for the editor of the New York Times to be talking that way, writing that way about aggregation. Patrick Paxton of the Washington Post, when a Washington Post journalist was found to have plagiarized, said that plagiarism is a perpetual danger in aggregated stories. Plagiarism is a perpetual danger in journalism if you don't attribute and you don't link. But there's nothing special about aggregation. In fact, many of the worst plagiarism instances in journalism have come from people who were doing what appeared to be original reporting. And that doesn't mean that plagiarism is inherently a perpetual danger in original reporting. Plagiarism happens when dishonest or careless journalists fail to attribute. In fact, I Googled this to make sure I wasn't stealing it, because when I heard it, or when I said it, I thought, that sounds clever, and then I thought, that sounds too clever for you, Buttry. Maybe you heard that from someone else. And so I Googled it, and I had written it before, so I was stealing it from myself. The only other place I could find was a place where I'd written it, but I didn't think it was that clever the first time I said it. I just wrote it. But attribution is the difference between plagiarism and research. And research is good journalism. Plagiarism is bad journalism. So let's talk a little bit about what aggregation is and who aggregates. How many here have read any part of the Bible? Okay, a few hands go up. The Bible is just an aggregation. God didn't sit down to write the Bible, or no journalist or prophet sat down to write the Bible. Lots of different people wrote things, chronicles and letters and things, and centuries ago, probably in Italy, some popes or scholars or theologians or somebody aggregated that into what we now know as the Bible. So that was aggregation. The public library is an aggregation. They choose from literature, from books and magazines and newspapers and things that are published, and bring them together for the public to read. Now, one of the bad raps that aggregation gets is that aggregation is ripping off what somebody wrote. That if they've read your little snippet on Huffington Post or Drudge or whatever, that even though you're linking to it, they don't really have to go there to read the whole thing. Well, that's what a public library is. All these people borrow that book, and the author gets just gets one sale out of it. But let me tell you, my wife is a novelist and self-published, and she would love to get her books into public libraries. Because for one thing, that would be a lot of sales. And for another thing, some of the people who borrow it in the library, she's not going to get any money from them, but some of them are going to want their own copy, or they're going to recommend it to a friend who's going to go out and buy it, and those sorts of things. But a public library is aggregation. My mom was a great aggregator. She would always clip out stories that she thought I would be interested in, or funny typos or bad use of the language that she thought I would find amusing. And she did a pretty good job of knowing what I would find amusing. Now, my tastes and interests grew up, and I was still Mom's little boy, so, the older I got, the less accurately she hit the target, but it was always sweet that she did that. She doesn't do it anymore. Mom has Alzheimer's, and so she doesn't read newspapers or much of anything anymore. But while she was in the early stages of Alzheimer's, she stopped sending me stuff. But I would go visit her, and there would be stacks of things she had clipped out with little Steve sticky notes on them, and sticky notes for my siblings, and so I would send them some of their stuff. And she was an aggregator. She was reading things that had been published somewhere else and sending them to me with actually no benefit to the Kansas City Star. That's where she lives, is in the Kansas City, Missouri area, except the fact that she was a subscriber. They got one sale from her, but they didn't get any money from me because I read what she had aggregated. And maybe some of your parents or somebody aggregates for you too, but if my mom does it, it can't be that bad. So that's part of who aggregates. But let's bring it to journalism now. The Associated Press and other wire services that are cooperatives that share the content of members are aggregators. Now they create original content. Sure, the Associated Press has bureaus and correspondents around the world. But I was a newspaper editor in Iowa, and I'll guarantee you their Iowa report was mostly an aggregation of stories from Iowa newspapers. And not only did we not get paid for that, we pay a hell of a lot of money to belong to AP for them to aggregate our stuff. I already mentioned the New York Times. My company, Digital First Media, we aggregate. And frankly, almost every newsroom aggregates. You see something that somebody else wrote. If you're a regional newspaper like I was, like I worked at in Des Moines and Cedar Rapids and some other Iowa and Midwestern communities, we would aggregate some things from other newspapers in our community. Sometimes we would do our own story, but sometimes we would use the AP copy or whatever. In the United States, sports writers frequently have what we call notes columns. That if you're covering the Major League Baseball and you're covering it for the Detroit Tigers, the Tigers fans care about the other teams in your division or all of Major League Baseball, and so sports writers would share these pieces that they didn't do the original reporting for, and sports fans love that stuff. Drudge and Huffington Post and lots of online aggregators kind of get that bad rap of being aggregators. And it's true, you can read something on HuffPo or Drudge, and lots of people who look at that are not ever going to click that link and go to you. But I tell you, we have, I've distributed guidelines to Digital First newsrooms about what Drudge and Huffington Post and Gawker and Fark and other aggregators like, because we get crazy traffic when they do it. There are enough people who link to it that our traffic will just go through the roof if Drudge uses something. And we've got a colleague in Connecticut, Helen Bennett Harvey at the New Haven Register, who's really good at understanding what Drudge is going to like, and she'll get a Drudge link, and we'll get just thousands and thousands of page views. Well, Drudge is getting benefit from that, but so are we. So I don't think that there's a lot of aggregation going on. So let's start by saying what is aggregation. I didn't put the English slide up here, but I tweeted. I did a version of this workshop earlier this month at the ACES conference, and I tweeted this: that aggregation is republication of information originally gathered by someone else. That's my definition of aggregation. I hope that's what it looks like in Italian. And it happens along a lot of range of things. And I actually meant to take trend maps off of this thing. I think trend maps went under or something. The link I had in my blog post on this was dead. But Google News does it by algorithm, and we know of other aggregators that pull things in strictly by algorithm. Every Block, which has also gone out of business, but it was that, and before that, Adrian Holovati's Chicago crime map were both data scrapers, and so what they do is they collect it by software and organize it, but there's not someone actually doing it. Curation is the human sorting and making editorial decisions, saying, okay, here's an interesting thing, we'll bring that in. I think re-reporting and hopefully advancing somebody else's story is a form of aggregation. And we've all done that, and we've all had that done to us. If you're first on a story, that's great. But if nobody else comes along and re-reports it, maybe it wasn't that good in the first place, So I like it when people come along and aggregate my stuff. It means I wrote a good story. And then, of course, original reporting still builds on something. There's some background or some data or those sorts of things. There's not a lot unless you're just interviewing one person, and that involves no research into that person's background, there's not many things that don't involve some level of aggregation. So we're going to talk about some principles that I think apply throughout this range of what aggregation is. The first time I heard the word curation, which I don't know if it's exactly the same in Italian as it is in English. When I put it in Google, I was going to say, when I put it in Google, it just said curation. So it's either the same or Google couldn't figure it out. Now, curator, it did translate. And so what this is the act of curating. The first time I heard it, I've got a pretty strong buzzword detector, and I don't like buzzwords. And the first time I heard it, I didn't like it, didn't like seeing it applied to journalism. But Andy Carvin, whose brother Eric is here, said, I think it's always been part of journalism. We just didn't call it that. And I think he's right. The more I started thinking about what a museum curator does and what a journalist does in putting together a story, the more I thought there is, some stories certainly, not every story works this way, there is a really strong parallel. If you're going to put together a museum, and I've been in Italy more than a week here, and you've got some fabulous museums, I have to say. And if you're going to put together a museum exhibit, you need to study that topic and understand it well, just like a journalist who's curating something needs to understand the topic and have some basis to work from. And then you choose the relevant content. If a museum is putting together a traveling exhibit, I was in Cedar Rapids, I was editor in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where the famous American artist Grant Wood, and I don't know if he's known internationally at all, but American Gothic was his most famous painting. He was from Cedar Rapids, and they put together a traveling Grant Wood exhibit not long before I got to Cedar Rapids. And they couldn't do that just with their own work. They had to gather content, artworks, from other sources, from other museums that had Grant Wood's works. They got them on loan, or from private collections. And they had to authenticate those. You wouldn't want to do a Grant Wood or Michelangelo or Botticelli exhibit and have a fake in there. They had to authenticate that, and journalists have to authenticate. We have to gather content from multiple sources, from social media, from other professional media, from blogs, from our own colleagues, from our own clips, and those sorts of things. And then you group the related items together. In Grant Wood's case, his sister was the model for the woman in the painting American Gothic, and she was the model for 2 or 3 other paintings of his. So they put the sister paintings together, or his Iowa landscape paintings together. And we group related content in organizing the story. We provide context, and like a museum curator puts all of that work together into an exhibit for the public, we publish something that often is going to be a story, or it might be a video, or an interactive graphic, or those sorts of things. But we publish the finished content. So the process is fairly similar. So I embraced the buzzword. So let's talk about the things, wherever you fall on the scale of aggregation, whether you're doing mechanical aggregation with an algorithm, or you're doing curation of content from lots of sources, or whether you're doing original reporting. If it's fair use, it's ethical. And fair use in the United States is also a legal concept that hasn't been very well defined. But basically, if you're using the full content, you're ripping it off. That's theft. But if you take an excerpt, or a few excerpts, that's going to be ethical. If you attribute, and I would say by author and publication, too often, and I don't know if this is an issue internationally, but for much of my career, it was very distasteful for any of the newsrooms I worked in to refer to the competition, whatever we perceived it to be. And so we would use the passive voice. Something was reported, like it just mysteriously came down from somewhere and was reported. Or we would say media reports. I worked for a few glorious months at a Washington local news operation called TBD.com that got a lot of hype. You may have read about it. It was in the Washington, D.C. area, and as you heard, my staff and I recruited a very extensive network of more than 200 bloggers throughout Washington, and something we heard frequently from them was that when the Washington Post, when they broke something and the Washington Post did a story, if they referred to them at all, it was as a local blogger. It was not by name, Homicide Watch or whatever. It was a local blogger. So attribute by author and publication, by the name of the journalist and the name of the organization, and link. I loved what Matthew Ingram said. I don't know if you heard Matthew Ingram, but he was talking about how links are kind of the essence of the web. Linking is, even if you get more value, you are driving traffic to them, but linking is good journalism. Beyond the ethics, we all, in every story that we write, publish less than all the information we gather. We always gather more information than we publish. And what we do is we decide, okay, this is how much background the average person probably needs for this story. But there are some people who've never heard of this before, even if it's the 15th story you've written on this topic. They're coming in new, and they want something new. And so the link provides context. It provides depth. And context and depth are good journalism. And you should also add value. And you can add value by commenting on it, by, it's a news story and you're aggregating it, but you're commenting on it. It was a quote-unquote objective story, but you're doing an opinion piece and you're commenting it on some fashion. You can maybe place it in a different context. You can localize it, or you can broaden its view. You can add some of your own content. At TBD, we would sometimes, if something that somebody else had reported was hot and was stirring up social media discussion, we would aggregate a paragraph or two from the story, link to the story, and then embed some of the tweets and say, here's some of the discussion. So we're adding content. We're pulling in content from multiple sources and making something new. So add some value, link, attribute, and use it fairly. And I think you're going to be ethical in your aggregation. Some ways you can add value. You can summarize something that was long. You already mentioned localize. You can round up multiple things. You can crowdsource. You can say, here's what they're reporting. What do you know about that? And start some further reporting. You can do the social media reaction of other media. You can organize it differently with some other things. Of course, we've already mentioned original reporting and background. You can verify it or you can challenge it. That's one of the things Andy Carvin is very good at. He aggregates, he curates things from Arab countries and says, does anybody know if this is true? And finds finds out whether it's true or whether it's not. I've already mentioned commentary and context. So think of how you can add value if you're aggregating. Don't just say, here's this interesting thing I read, but how can you add value? There's lots of good aggregation and curation tools. I use Storify a lot. I really like that. I've used Sponge just a little and it's on my to-do list, and we're working with them at Digital First. I like Publish too. Document Cloud is a terrific aggregation and curation tool that allows annotation, and one of the co-founders of Document Cloud, Aaron Pilhofer, is here. I hope you've already heard him. Of course, Google and Twitter are great tools. Twitter's advanced search is a fabulous tool. How many of you have used Twitter's advanced search function? If you haven't used Twitter's advanced search function, email me. I'll send you a link to my blog post about it. You can use Google to translate it into Italian or whatever your language is, and it is a fabulous tool that journalists need to know how to use. And so those are tools that are helpful for aggregation and curation. And I think one of the ways you really add value is authenticate. You know, you ask, how do they know that? I think that's one of the journalists' most important questions when you're out interviewing. If you're a reporter interviewing people and they tell you something, you ask, how do you know that? And if they know it because they were there and they saw it, or they did the research on their own, that's much better than, you know, I overheard it in a bar, I saw a tweet about it, or whatever. You want to know how they know that. If you're an editor, you want to ask reporters, how do you know that? And if you're an aggregator, you want to ask yourself and see if you can tell from the context, how do they know this? You know, was the reporter there? Do they cite their sources? I did a blog post this morning very critical of Dylan Byers of Politico for his piece saying that Jill Abramson had lost the newsroom at the New York Times. On all of his sources were not named except for two who were defending her. And yes, okay, yeah. So you know, I want to know how do you know that? Were you talking to men or were you talking to women? Because this sure sounds like a sexist piece here. And he didn't even identify the gender of the people he was talking to. So to me, it was not a reliable piece. And so you need to ask those skeptical questions of those. You can ask the crowd. Again, Andy Carvin is excellent at doing this. You can check the links in the piece that you're aggregating from. You can look for tweets and information about their sources and try to understand their sources. I've always, you know, I can't say attribute often enough here, so I threw that on here again. But I think it's also important to say what you don't know. And that's an important part of this. So those are my points to kind of set up the discussion. I welcome you to continue the discussion with your questions, with your own aggregation experiences. If you feel like Bill Keller, please, I love a good argument. I respect people who argue with me. We'll hear the other side of aggregation. Let's talk. Sure, go ahead. Okay.
I'll just ask the first question. Join me. I was listening to you, and I was wondering about what I do is basically social media curation all the time, like 14 hours a day. And often, even in the second step of storifying some live tweeting that I've been making, I realize that what really keeps the whole thing together is what I insert in between my sources. So can we say that same items, different person, we get a different product, different journalistic product? And how much of that is actually ours?
I think the new product is yours. I'm going to remember this like 10 minutes after we're done. Somebody recently, and I'm trying. I won't be able to attribute it. Somebody made a. It's not going to sound nearly as clever as that person who said it, but was talking. It made a cooking analogy of some sort. That that I didn't grow the crops, but the soup is mine. Or like I said, it was much more clever than that. I think as a journalist who takes pride in your work, you want it to be and feel like your work. And so, as you said with Storify, and Storify is a fabulous tool. How many of you have used Storify? Not enough hands going up, so I'm going to talk about learning to use Storify in a minute. But Storify makes the aggregation part, the finding and pulling stuff together, very easy. You can just do these searches in the Storify search module, and you can either just drag them over or double-click or click to go to the top, double-click to go to the bottom. It's really easy to do the aggregation part, but what makes a good Storify is the organization. Okay, this item and this item belong together, and like you said, the part that you do, the setting it up and noting the relationship and those sorts of things, makes it yours and makes 14 hours is a long day, by the way. Makes that a satisfying 14-hour day, I hope. That because of the insight and organization that you bring and that you add to that. And so that even if, and there are different kinds of Storifys, that some of them are Storifys where it's mostly writing and a lot of original reporting, and then occasionally where there would be a quote, somebody brings in a tweet or a Instagram picture or those sorts of things. And then there are other things that are just almost, here's a bunch of tweets.
Right.
But even if it's here's a bunch of tweets, by organizing them and having a heading between each of the 2 or 10 or 15 sections, that organization, that explanation, even if it's just a line or two of what these two mean, makes it yours. And so I think that's an excellent question. That aggregation is creative work. I mentioned libraries as aggregators. I've got a sister-in-law who's a librarian, and her work understanding and finding the right books for the right students and those sorts of things is very creative work that's kind of similar to what journalists do sometimes. Here, this is something that's going to be helpful for you. And so I think you want to be adding value, and the way you describe it.
Adding value.
Yeah. So let me just for a moment tell you something, because I didn't see enough hands go up to say that you use Storify. When Storify came out, I'm going to go to the website for Storify here. Hang on. It'll help if I get on the right keys. Storify came out in the fall of 2010. And the I'll log in here. I could see right away that it was going to be an important tool for journalists. Let's see if I can remember my password.
Promise not to forget.
Oh, crap. And I'm typing on an unfamiliar keyboard, so nothing's in quite the right place. But so let's see. But Storify came out in I think October of 2010. And did it say it was wrong?
Would you like to access without logging on one of your Storify?
Sure. Yeah. We'll just do it from the outside. I was going to show you how. Where's the backslash? I'm not seeing backslash. Okay. What we'll do is we'll go to this person's Storify.
I can't remember my password either.
Okay. Okay, Storify came out. Why do I keep hitting the caps lock? Storify came out in the fall of 2010, and I was very busy. We had just launched TBD, and my initial reaction was, "Oh my God, I don't have time to learn something new." And fortunately, Mandy Jenkins, who I recommend following, I recommend reading her blog, zombiejournalism.com, and following her on Twitter at mjenkins. She's one of the brightest people I've ever worked with, and her job was social media. She worked for me, and it came out like on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and by Friday she was using Storify to cover a breaking news story, and I could see, oh wow, this is cool. I need to set aside an afternoon to learn how to use Storify. And I did set aside an afternoon. I'm going to try logging. I think I've got an actual password. I don't think I need to log in through Twitter. So I said, okay, I need to set aside an afternoon because I'm, as you already heard, I'm an old guy. Grew up in the '60s. I had my first paper out in the '60s. Wrote my first professional story in 1971. And so I don't learn this digital stuff real fast. And so I set aside an afternoon to learn how to use Storify. And about 15 minutes later, I had a free afternoon because it's really easy. Let's see if this I save all my passwords in my Gmail, and if okay, I got in. Okay. So here's what you do, and feel free if somebody's got a question and wants to take it in another direction, but I just want to show you really quickly. Okay, you'd put a headline. We'll call this IJF. Ooh, I hit the wrong thing. Yeah. You would write a better headline than that and write a better lead than this. But if we wanted to search for tweets about the festival, we're just going to put IJF 13 since I don't see the hashtag symbol. I just do a search for all tweets about this, and I can see here are tweets about this. And so it's as easy as dragging and dropping. Like I said, if you double-click something, it goes to the top. If you shift double-click, it goes to the bottom. You can move it around. If you want to put some text and say these two tweets are about whatever, you can put text in between any two elements. You can search Facebook. Facebook is much harder to search because so much of Facebook's content is private and because Facebook's search engine sucks. YouTube has a really good search engine, and you can usually find stuff on YouTube. The problem is, it's got a good search engine. The problem is people don't put enough text with their videos, and it doesn't search the actual videos. But if they do have text with the videos, it does find it. You can search Flickr and Instagram for photos. You can search breaking news. You can search Tumblr. You can do a Google search. You can cut and paste a link in, and it's going to bring those items in, and you can just drag and drop them over. So, if we want to say, okay, is anybody doing, I don't want to connect it with my Instagram account. Let's see if anybody's doing any Flickr photos using IJF. And so, here's a picture that we can move in. See who that was. Hope it wasn't me. I never looked good that big. But, so this is one of the other panels going on, a picture from that. And here, so it is a great tool. But I want to make the point that a lot of these tools are much easier to use than you think they are. In 15, 20 minutes, I was pretty good at Storify. Now, there are some advanced things like learning how to do a slideshow and you can, if you put, and I won't take the time to remember how I did this, but it's really easy. If you put the bookmarklet in your toolbar, can click to storify this on anything on the web anywhere. So when I go to Twitter on my computer, because I've got that right next to retweet and favorite and all those things, it's Storify this. And I can click that, and it goes into my story pad. So you can see these are tweets that I have storified. So let me pause here. We've kind of gotten off into Storify, which is fine because I love it. But let me pause to see if there are any other questions. Can we get a microphone here? Rachel's got a question. I don't know why I'm wearing these when I'm
Sorry, you might have already covered this. I might have been engrossed in Twitter. When you're dragging and dropping pictures, content, etc., is that okay to just use anything that is available through Storify? Because obviously it's public content, but they might not have thought about the context in which it might be being used.
Excellent question. Twitter, Facebook content that's public is public. The terms of service of Twitter is we own the tweets. Anybody that uses the Twitter API can use those things. And of course, it brings the attribution and the linking in. So that's just automatic when you're using Storify or Sponge. I think because it's bringing the linking in, it's always safe. The one thing I would do is on Flickr, because people said, and I asked Bert Herman this, and he said, we haven't done anything about that, but that's like been a year or two ago that I asked him. So they might have it now set that they're only bringing in things that they can bring in on Flickr. But on Flickr, the user can set a level of attribution. Creative Commons, anybody can use it, just have at it, have fun, to all rights reserved. And so I would at least check the Flickr photos that you're going to use to see if they are Creative Commons or some level of attribution. If it's attribution required, it pulls in the attribution, so you're fine there. But excellent question. Yes, it is. Let me give you an example here. We're going to pull in. The. Is it Control C to copy? We've got a Mac person on a PC here. So if I pull in this link from, it does. I did remember that. Okay. So now I click that. It's going to bring in my blog post. And so you see, if I pull it over and bring it in here, it's not sucking in all of my text and my slides and all of those things.
It's a card.
Let's hide that. It's got the headline, it's got the link, it's got that too big picture of me and the first line or two. And so that's fine. I think the only place where you've got an issue, well, of course, YouTube, if they don't have embedding allowed, it's not going to embed, but almost everybody on YouTube embeds. The Flickr is the one that I would worry about because of the different levels there, and I haven't followed up with Bert to see if they've fixed that and addressed it. Other questions, comments? Andreas.
Hi, Steve. Hi, Steve.
Hi.
I abuse of your presence here in Perugia.
Thank you.
I want to ask you a simple and maybe stupid question.
There are no stupid. The stupid questions are the ones we don't ask.
In this kind of job, aggregation and curation job, how do you become accountable? How do you become Alaska? Because, accountability is a big factor in this kind of job, I think.
Sure.
Have you got any tips?
Excellent question. Not a stupid question at all. Accountability is important in journalism. I think people who aggregate should have their work, because as we just discussed, it's very creative work. And they should have bylines, and if somebody thinks that you've ripped them off, they should be able to reach out to you and have that discussion about whether you accredited them appropriately and those sorts of things, and whether you made fair use or copied it all and those sorts of things. I think in addition to crediting the content, we should credit the author of aggregated work. Other questions, comments, arguments?
Yes, well, the subject of accountability brings to mind also the fact is, I work mostly with citizen journalism, basically sources.
Sure.
So when you quote them, you both credit them and lay responsibility on them for single individual responsibility. But then it's the aggregator responsibility to verify that the storytelling that those sources are providing for. So maybe, and I wanted to know how do you know an aggregator is accountable? How do you know it's affidabile?
Excellent question. I think you want
reliable.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think you want to look at the body of work. This goes back to where I was saying, how do they know that? That you want to look and say, okay, what has their reputation been? Can I see the rest of their work? I'm going to show you something. And that network of 200 blogs, our staff of community hosts checked out each of those blogs, read a lot of their work, and thought, okay, this is somebody we want to invite. I mean, we did send out some public appeals, hey, let us know if you want to be in our network. But mostly we were reaching out, researching blogs, and reaching out to them and saying, hey, we'd like you to join our network. So we read them and thought, okay, this is somebody who
we can trust.
Yeah, who looks like they do quality work. And we didn't have any problems with them. Andy Carvina, whom I've already mentioned, wait a second, I need to click. They changed the front page. Andy does some fabulous curation, and I'm not going to look at the gay girl in Damascus that wasn't, but I encourage you to look at it, and you can see how crowdsourcing and curation helped him blow that story up, that she wasn't gay, she wasn't even female, and he wasn't in Damascus. And so it's an excellent example of crowdsourcing and curation. But we're going to go with this one because it goes to the accountability and authentication. And I hope the picture is displaying better. Last time I looked at this, I think the picture has been taken down. But what this was somebody had posted on the Almanara Facebook page a picture of, I'll hit the link and see if that brings it up. A picture of, okay, it just goes to their homepage, not to their Facebook page, not to the picture. A picture of a munitions shell with what looked like a 6-pointed star with what looked like a crescent above it. And the suggestion on the Almanara Facebook page was, hey, are the Israelis arming the Libyan rebels? This was found in Libya during the uprising there. And Andy, can we put this up? I'm sorry, I didn't realize that hadn't been up on the board. Can we put the screen back up? Was this up when I was doing Storify? Okay, that's good.
It was. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's saying they ID it as Israeli, maybe not, need help to ID it, anyone. So he is, remember I said it's important to say what you know and what you don't know, and he's saying, okay, I don't know that this is Israeli. They're saying they think it is. Can you guys help me find it? And what he did was he unlocked the knowledge and creativity of, Andy's got something like 70,000 Twitter followers, way more than me. But they find out quickly that what looked like a crescent was actually a parachute, and what looked like a Star of David was actually a symbol dating back to World War I, before the State of Israel was created, for illumination flares. This was a shell that artillery forces fire out in the nighttime into a target area that lights up the area, and they can see, okay, that's where I want to fire the real stuff. And that's what it was. But Andy, by throwing this out to his tweeps, starts aggregating and curating things.
And debunking
that,
as well.
Yeah, that they found that debunked this, that he's curating a page from a munitions manufacturer's catalog that somebody found for him. And, you could do this in old school journalism. I used to be a pretty good investigative reporter, and I could probably track that story down in 2 or 3 weeks. Andy tracked it down in 2 or 3 hours by turning the crowd loose, by asking, how do you know that up front, and trying to get to the truth. The Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, the first point of it is seek truth and report it. And I think this is a great example of that. He was seeking truth. He found the truth through aggregation, through all these different online sources. He did not interview a munitions authority, munitions historian who could say this. What he did was his tweets sent him links to these different manufacturers' websites so that you could see, here's a manufacturer in India that has that same symbol on theirs. Here's a manufacturer in France, and so on. And then this historian and catalog and all of those sorts of things.
Actually,
so
Andy Carbin says hi.
Andy says hi? Oh, that's great.
I
we're
just tweeted, we were
tell
talking about him,
you told him I gave him a shout out?
and he
All right.
tweeted back.
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
And actually, when you were talking about reputation, we know that reputation has so much value: character, reputation, reliability. It's such a big value of the stories that we tell, and it's probably a new phase where, old journalism has to go back to its own ethical roots. But the question everybody asks is, how do we pay that? Ethics, reliability, reputation are not money. That's what most say, actually.
Excellent point. And I think that Drudge and Huffington Post are showing that aggregation has economic value. That Huffington Post makes enough money to support a large staff. I don't know how long they'll keep going. I don't know if they're being part of AOL will turn out to be a good move or a bad move. But they started out from a small operation of Arianna Huffington thinking, well, maybe I should start a blog, to a huge newsroom with, I think, over 200 newsrooms with something like over 200 staff members. Now, some of those are creating original journalism, but a lot of them are hardworking aggregators who get a paycheck and benefits. Drudge is much smaller, but I'm sure he's making a lot of money. So I think you have to build a healthy business model around it, and we're struggling with that as an organization, as an industry. But I'm confident that we're going to find a way. Are we an hour session or an hour and a half?
We're an hour and 20 minutes, actually.
Hour and 20 minutes, okay. Okay, when you got up, I thought, are we just an hour? I was thinking we were an hour and a half. But
May I add something?
Absolutely.
Parlo in italiano. A proposito dell'aggregazione, che cos'è aggregazione? La Bibbia, le biblioteche, la mamma e tante altre cose. New York Times, Corriere della Sera, Repubblica. In questi mesi io ho fatto un corso all'università di storia del giornalismo ed mi è stato chiarissimo, una cosa che sapevo, ma quando vai a vedere gli oggetti, i documenti, ti è chiarissimo, che il giornalismo dall'inizio della sua storia moderna, cioè nell'Ottocento, è un giornalismo che riporta notizie di altri giornali. Dice, il Courier a Vienna dice che la corte di Asburgo ha detto questo. Ed ecco, ci sono intere colonne di giornali negli Stati Uniti, in Francia, in Inghilterra, in Italia, che sono fatte così. Sono fatte di giornali che riprendono altri giornali. È sin dall'inizio del giornalismo moderno che il giornalismo è stato fatto, diciamo, sulle spalle di altro giornalismo e non poteva essere differentemente. Naturalmente nell'Ottocento il pubblico di un posto preciso poteva essere raggiunto soltanto dal giornale di quel posto e quindi aveva un senso diverso. Oggi che tutti noi siamo a un click di distanza da qualunque cosa, il discorso è un pochino diverso. Dobbiamo tutti aggregare tutte le stesse cose, questo naturalmente è da discutere. E anche nel giornalismo contemporaneo, compreso il giornalismo contemporaneo italiano, lo dico perché ci sono molti colleghi italiani che questo, e non solo italiani, non lo hanno ben chiaro, continua a fare questo. La gran parte delle nostre corrispondenze dall'estero sono fatte fondamentalmente sulla base di ciò che il corrispondente legge sui giornali della città dove è basato, poi magari li integra con proprie conoscenze, con delle interviste, eccetera, ma quella è sostanzialmente la base su cui lavora. Ciò che manca, in certi casi drammaticamente manca, è la seconda parte, cioè l'attribution, cioè il fatto che dica sì, il Corriere della Sera ha scritto questa cosa è sbagliata magari per queste e queste ragioni, oppure è giusta ma c'è anche questa cosa in più nuova. Allora, mentre nel mondo della stampa, nel senso della stampa di carta, questo è una cosa che si continua a fare e sembra non dare grandi problemi, appena questa cultura è trasportata nel mondo digitale diventa per le persone insopportabile. Quindi scusatemi, mi sono aggiunto a quello che dite voi perché quando c'è una retorica del giornalismo originale. Con cose, non c'è più l'original reporting, non ci sta più. Ecco, il giornalismo è sempre stato originale in parte e costruito sul giornalismo di altri.
I fully agree. That was very well said. Thank you, Marina.
Aggiungo solo una cosa brevissima a quello che diceva Mario. In realtà la questione dell'attribuzione e la questione dell'originalità sono diverse, no? Ma la questione dell'attribuzione è straordinario come sia una grande tradizione del giornalismo tradizionale che in realtà si è persa, e siccome siamo costretti a rifletterci perché dobbiamo applicarla nel nuovo giornalismo web, che tra l'altro ha molte più fonti, improvvisamente il giornalismo tradizionale riscopre l'etica dell'attribuzione, no? Ma quello è un dovere per tutti i tipi di giornalismo, insomma. Scusa, vai.
Agree again.
Faccio anch'io la domanda in italiano. La mia domanda la mia curiosità era questa: che differenza vedi tra la costruzione di aggregati da fonti su una storia ancora in divenire e una storia chiusa? Non so, capisco le prime pagine dopo l'attacco alla maratona di Boston è una cosa, come potreste aggregarla? La ricerca del colpevole mentre ancora c'è.
Well, I think certainly a running story needs to. I think the right story form for breaking news is an evolving thing. I think we're doing it much better than we did it 2 years ago, but I think we're going to find some better tools and better forms coming along. But certainly, there were lots of false reports in the Boston bombing aftermath, and even more in the search and for the suspects and the gunfights and all of that. The false reports of arrests and suspects that weren't suspects, all of that. My feeling is that if something is wrong, it needs to be, wherever it is online, it needs to be corrected, so that if somebody's aggregating that, or has already aggregated that, but they've linked to it, that somebody who clicks that link is not going to go to an old story that says those two kids who were on the front page of the New York Post were bagman, because they weren't bagman. Because things live online, and because not only professional journalists, but people on their Facebook pages and their Twitter accounts and everything are aggregating and sharing these things, I think we have an obligation to correct misinformation or update outdated information. Sometimes something was right when it was reported, but it's become outdated. That if it's still there and people are still linking to it, we need to update it or include a link to the new, the correct updated version or something. Yes.
Just a second. Our friends, the translators, we didn't know they had to pose at 4 o'clock. So we will go on. We will go on in English.
Okay.
Thanks for your help. E quindi andiamo, i traduttori sono in pausa, abbiamo una decina di minuti per stare ancora insieme e lo faremo in inglese. We still have 10 minutes to go, but we will go on using English, because I think it's more or less the main language.
Mi presto.
And if you'd like, I can
Non
type
bene
some
come
things
loro.
into Google. And
No, actually, I wouldn't do that.
No. How bad were those Google translations?
It was very funny.
Okay,
It was very
okay.
funny.
Well,
Especially bad rap. The
bad
translation of bad rap.
I don't even want to know what that might mean. So, was there a question?
No, they don't want to talk with other translators.
Well, let me mention one more thing that it's gotten a little afield from aggregation, but it goes to the accuracy point that we've been discussing, and it came up in a discussion yesterday. In fact, it came up because I raised it in a discussion. But I think that somebody's going to develop, and somebody should develop, and until they develop an automated way that for bad mistakes it's worth the time-consuming process of doing it by hand, because credibility is so important to us, and as you said, Andrea, because accountability is so important. Everybody in journalism gets a lot of traffic when people share our stuff on Facebook or retweet our stories. So when we've been wrong, seriously wrong, I'm not talking a small typo, I'm talking we identified the wrong suspect or those serious mistakes, I think we've got an obligation to find out, and Twitter tells you who retweeted you, and you can, with some searches, find out who retweeted you the old-fashioned RT way. But I think you can and should tweet at them and say, please note and retweet, thanks for the retweet, but please note that I've corrected and retweet this as well. You're not going to reach all of their followers because we don't all see everybody's tweets that we follow and those sorts of things. But I think that...
Actually, Zeynep Tufekci, the Turkish-American teacher, è una ragazza molto giovane turca che si occupa tantissimo di nuovi media, che insegna all'università negli Stati Uniti. She said she wished Twitter had a way to not delete an old tweet, but not erase it, but mark it as cancelled.
Yeah.
Because that means that you've changed your mind or you made a mistake or for whatever reason, but you still want the tweet to appear in your timeline, in your feed, as something that you have actually produced. but also marking the fact
Sure.
that you have changed your mind.
One of my many inaccurate predictions about what's going to happen in journalism are actually, maybe it's not inaccurate, it's just not yet accurate, is that I think Twitter should and will create a pro version that I would pay for that allows you to edit a tweet, but that would show the history, so that you could go back and correct a tweet, and hopefully that would.
I think they will give it. They will give that to us for free sooner or later.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, but
because Twitter is so much going towards the pro,
sure,
to journalistic industry.
Sure.
And then whatever happens with mistakes, TV live coverage has done it all the time.
Sure.
They make mistakes. They don't correct them. They just go straight ahead, and you just sort of absorb.
And they've got some people trust them and some people don't. I mean, that does affect their reputation. Rachel, you look like you had something to say.
You spoke about retweeting the people that have tweeted what you've said to let them know so they can help circulate the correct information. So currently, would you then go back and delete the incorrect tweets so you then prevent more people being added to your to-do list to contact?
Yes, I am not a big believer in unpublishing, but I actually deleted a tweet today. In tweeting about Matthew Ingram, I said old media I said new media when I meant old media. You know,
that happens.
Who's ever done that? You know, and you know, I corrected it. You know, somebody called it to my attention. I tweeted out, corrected it, but then I went back and deleted that because I didn't want anybody retweeting what was wrong. You know, as I'm not a big believer in unpublishing, but because you can't correct it, I'll delete one that's inaccurate. So I do.
But then you can delete, but also tweet one more time saying that I deleted that tweet because of these reasons.
I tweet the correction.
Yeah. So you won't find the original, but that's the reason why I did it. That's one of the things that really struck me about what Steve says is if you don't know something, just say it. I don't know. This information is lacking. Or if you make a mistake, just admit it, because it's so much better for your credibility to admit mistakes.
And saying what you don't know is a good way to learn what you don't know. I mean, if you say, and that's what Andy Carvin is so good at, you know, is saying, okay, I don't know about this. What do you know? And, you know, he's got 70,000 of his closest friends on Twitter helping him find out. And
the thing is that journalists usually are very afraid of being vulnerable, as I don't know this makes you, because maybe you know so much about something, but so little about something else, which is normal. But journalists usually think that because they're the guardians of information, they should know everything.
Well, but I think that crowdsourcing, and again, we're getting a little afield from aggregation, but that's okay. That's a good discussion that goes different directions. Crowdsourcing works its best when you are, you know, crowdsourcing in its essence is saying, I don't know this, what do you know? Okay. But it's most effective when you do know something. When you know, if you just say, hey, does anyone know anything about this? You get kind of general answers, or I hear from many of our newsrooms that when they try crowdsourcing, people will say, you know, fire back, well, do your own work, you know, and those sorts of things. And it's because they've asked this general question. But if you're asking something specific, if you say, okay, we know A, B, and C, we're trying to figure out, is it D or is it E? That's a very specific question, and somebody knows, and you've given them something of value, and they're going to be more likely to help you. So I think how you reveal your ignorance helps. You know, you're showing something and asking for something. And I used to cover agriculture, and I knew next to nothing about agriculture. I very seldom had anything dirty on my shoes, and I found the best way to get that if I tried to to show farmers that I knew something, because I was learning, and sometimes I'd try to show my knowledge. They could see right through and see that I didn't know anything. But if I ask for their help, farmers are like evangelists. They love to tell you about farming, and they were just tremendous in helping educate me, because I was willing to be vulnerable and say, I don't know how this works. Can you help me out? Sources and people, knowledgeable people in the public, will help you if you.
So another commandment could be never fake it.
People have really good BS detectors, and I would not say never fake it, because I've faked it many times, but I usually get caught. So people can see through that pretty well. We've got a question in the back, or a comment.
I don't know, this may be a little bit out of the purview of the discussion at hand.
We've already gone out.
Yeah. So. I edit a magazine that actually most of our content originates online as blog posts and things like that, and then becomes sort of longer form, deeper journalism that comes into a print magazine that's quarterly. And so we sort of struggle with this, how do you deal with a piece of journalism that starts as often as aggregation, and becomes something more with more research, more interview, that kind of thing. But then how do you translate the accountability that's actually much easier to do online into print when your source comes from online? We've tried layout things like working the actual tweet or the actual, whatever the online source is into the print layout, but it's not something I've seen very much before.
That's a tough one. You can't link from print, and you can't link from broadcast, and linking is the best form of attribution. But I think you want to attribute by name, by date. You said you were a magazine, and so sometimes there's some time lapsing between when you do your reporting and when you publish. So I think you want to attribute by name. You want to cover the time angle, and I would, if you of course, putting links, as long as this one, well, of course it's not out there, but, putting a huge URL in a magazine is pointless. But you could do bit.ly links, that a customized bit.ly link with, that refer somebody to an original source. I would encourage doing that where appropriate. Obviously, you can't do it in text. It would need to be in a related box or something like that. But I think I always err on the side of over-attribution, and I think that's true in print or broadcast as well as online. Especially since you can't link, that I'd definitely attribute, and if it's really something important, do it with a shortened link like a bit.ly.
I think our time is over because the next panel. They need to get in.
Well, this has been a delight for me. I'll remind you again, slides and links on my blog, stevebuttry.wordpress.com. And
you can spend the nights and nights on that. I am telling them.
Thank you.
There's so much to read. C'è tantissimo da leggere.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.